The launch of the Nintendo Switch 2 is almost upon us, and I bet you are waiting with bated breath to hear about it from press and for folks to talk about what the console is actually like, the final version in their hands, fully tested, fully reviewed. Well, unfortunately, that's just not something that's going to happen. Customers will not be able to make informed decisions because Nintendo has decided that they don't want to ship review units to media outlets. They essentially are making it so that there are no reviews of the Nintendo Switch 2 at launch. And that is just not particularly kosher, not something that a lot of people are for. And Nintendo did kind of release a statement to media outlets like Video Games Chronicle saying that there are important features and updates that won't be available at launch until a system update is applied on the day of the console's release, June 5th. And that's why they decided not to ship Switch 2 review units to media outlets. But they didn't exactly detail what those pivotal updates are, so there's no real way to gauge the validity of this reasoning. And I don't get the sense that it was utterly impossible for them to ship Switch 2 units. And even if a couple features were missing, as long as it still plays games and it has certain basic menu features, and as long as there's a console that runs, maybe it's missing, I don't know, the game chat feature at launch or something. But as long as a lot of the basic features are there and media outlets are warned that there are certain features missing that they'll only be able to test out after launch, they should still be able to send out review units so that what is available during the review process is still something that can be talked about so people can be aware of, like the hardware and the software and, tests that haven't been done yet, like battery life and all these things. People want to know this information beforehand before they make a purchase decision, and that is just not a possibility. And so you're going to have a lot of customers buying the Switch 2 kind of blindly hoping that it is as good a product as it looks. And look, don't get me wrong, the Switch 2 does look like a good piece of hardware, and a lot of the games that are coming out for it do look fantastic, and I have no doubt that it is going to be a quality product, but it doesn't change the fact that an environment where there are no reviews at launch or before launch, where people cannot gauge exactly what it is they're getting, is ultimately just not particularly consumer friendly. Now, this is not just detrimental for customers. Nintendo not sending out review units also means that press won't be able to cover some of the launch titles for the Switch 2 early. Not only are we talking about the Nintendo games, and those are going to sell, like Mario Kart World doesn't need a bunch of reviews to tell you to buy the game for people to buy the game because it's freaking Mario Kart. It's one of those games that it's not just hardcore gamers, but the masses in general just love Mario Kart. So that game's going to sell well, but there are a lot of third-party games that we're hoping for day one coverage that just won't be getting that, and so that might potentially affect the sales of third-party titles that may be really good, but may be buried under the fact that Nintendo has its own launch titles and there's no coverage surrounding those third-party launch games, so people may not be aware of some of the titles that are releasing for it. And so that lack of coverage is detrimental to some of those third-party game publishers and developers. But then on the consumer side of things, you just won't get coverage on the games that maybe you're curious about, third-party games that you're like, I wonder if this is good, but you won't know if they're good, especially if they're coming out only on the Nintendo Switch 2, because reviewers don't have the ability to tell you about those games before launch to inform you if that's a product worth getting, if that is software that you want to get for the Nintendo Switch 2, or, at least inform you what the pros and cons are. And then beyond that, there's the inconvenience of the fact that the Nintendo Switch 2 is launching a day before Summer Game Fest. And so you've got a situation where journalists and folks who cover video games have to juggle reviewing the Nintendo Switch 2, but also covering everything that comes along with Summer Game Fest. And so that's only going to further delay Switch 2 coverage because of all these things that media outlets have to cover all at once. And not every outlet, is, your conglomerates like IGN who have a whole team, right? I mean, there's some content creators who are just a handful of people and they can only do so much. So they're having their attention split between all these major gaming events. It's just not particularly conducive to an ideal review environment where they can really take their time and cover the Nintendo Switch 2 to an extensive and thorough degree, which would have been possible if Nintendo had sent out Switch 2 review units. Even if it was like a week before the console's launch, it would have made a significant difference. But Nintendo's deciding no review units whatsoever, and it is up to customers to discover for themselves what the product that they purchased entails without media coverage, detailing all of the pros and cons, all of the benefits and flaws of getting this device on day one at launch. The editor of that article, Andy Robinson, also took to Twitter to talk about this and why this is just not a particularly good thing, not a good trend to set. And plenty of folks have expressed and echoed sentiments of, yeah, this is really not a good thing, and it's kind of disappointing. Some people expressing umbrage at how Nintendo's really trying to control the message surrounding the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2. Folks saying things like, this is what controlled messaging looks like. They do not want the performance and the comparisons to be out in the wild before the products hits shelves. I also think a major factor is the fact that the Nintendo Switch 2 has seen so many leaks that Nintendo's gotten really paranoid. That's why there is this thing that people have seen where those who have gotten their Switch 2s like a couple days early before launch were not able to actually play games on it, or we're not actually able to have a functional console because apparently the Nintendo Switch 2 needs a day one patch for it to be able to run at all. And so Nintendo is really kind of putting measures in place to ensure that there are no leaks before day one at launch. And that also brings up the concern of the fact that Nintendo does have the ability to remotely make it so that your console, the hardware that you bought is not functional through software updates and through patches that they can send out if they deem it that you misused the Nintendo Switch 2 or did something that they did not want. The amount of control that they're exerting over the Nintendo Switch 2 is kind of concerning in terms of what kind of precedent that sets for future hardware releases. Other journalists like Jess Corden here from Windows Central are saying that this right here just feels like a red flag. You've got Destin here from IGN thanking VGC for calling Nintendo out on this one, how no review units is just kind of crazy across the board and is not good for just about every group within the gaming realm, from journalists to customers to developers. This is not good for anyone. Now, Andy Robinson does say that, nobody's ultimately privileged to receive review products, review units, anything of the sort. It's just the fact that no review units went out at all is kind of unprecedented. This is just genuinely never happened with a console launch, or we don't really know much about it prior to release, or there hasn't been extensive testing prior to release for people to be able to read about or watch about and really feel informed about what it is they're spending $450 on. Now, do I ultimately think this is going to be woefully detrimental to Nintendo Switch 2 sales? No, not at all. The Nintendo Switch brand is just in a really strong place right now because of how successful the Switch 1 was. And the appeal of the Switch 2 is basically it's a more powerful Switch that can output at 4K, that has DLSS, that can run Switch 1 games, but better, so on and so forth, on top of all of the cool new games that are coming out for the Nintendo Switch 2, taking all of these AAA games on the go. That's an appealing prospect for people, who are just living their lives and are busy and are constantly on the go. And the notion of being able to conveniently take all of your games and all of your gaming experiences everywhere you go. So, Nintendo Switch 2 just has everything going for it. I think that ultimately people are going to be excited for it, regardless of whether journalists and reviewers get their hands on it and are able to talk about their experiences with it early or not. What's more concerning than anything is just the precedent that this sets in terms of corporations really trying to control coverage of a product and almost really trying to control the messaging surrounding a product, normalizing a situation where people only get the information that the company wants them to see, or they delay the output of information, especially when it comes to potential negative elements of a product that they're shipping. I mean, Nintendo's already set the precedent for $80 games, and that was already a huge point of contention. Now for them to potentially start normalizing an environment where companies can get away with not informing customers about what it is they're buying prior to launch, and not allowing media to be able to, warn people about certain things, or even, relay the positive things and aspects about a product. The lack of consideration about how important that is, that's the part that I'm a little concerned about in terms of companies thinking that this can be the new normal. And then beyond that, a lot of folks in the games industry, games journalists like Tom Warren, senior editor at The Verge, they've expressed how there's something weirdly just not exciting about the Nintendo Switch 2 launch. While he did pre-order one, the launch just feels a bit meh in terms of the hardware itself is just, a more powerful Switch 2. games like Mario Kart, some people might be thrilled about, but others are like, it's just Mario Kart and there's nothing like, like a new Mario or a new Zelda, something that really gets them excited. And Danny Pena from, Gamertag Radio also expressed that he's glad to see that he's not the only one feeling this way. I don't know. For one, I'm excited about the prospect of being able to take Switch 1 games on the go on this bigger screen with the more comfortable ergonomics and with some of the updates that developers are putting out there for their Switch 1 games that allow them to run better on the Switch 2. I'm excited about the backwards compatibility aspect combined with some of the new games that are going to be there at launch. But I do agree that if you're not huge on Mario Kart, there's nothing here that is like that killer, console seller game. Mario Kart World is that for the masses, but in terms of that one game that's like, holy shit, this is like the thing that I've been meaning to play for so long. I would say that's not quite there, but there's some cool titles, both from first party and third party. Like there's enough of a launch lineup that I think it'll still be a decent enough launch as far as software is concerned. I'm awaiting the next Donkey Kong game, the Bonanza game. That's the one that I'm like really looking forward to. I wish that was there at launch, or Metroid Prime 4. If that was there at launch, I'd be all about it. But those are coming in a little later. I don't know. For me, new hardware is always exciting, so I am kind of pumped to like finally get my hands on the Switch 2 and talk about it to you all. But I'm not excited about the prospect of companies normalizing this idea that they can just get away with not informing customers about their products and having that level of control over messaging for a product's launch. The way game companies have done marketing has changed dramatically over the years, where they can just kind of put out a trailer or, like a Nintendo Direct or some kind of live stream presentation at their own pace, and it can still gain traction. And so maybe Nintendo's just so confident in their product that they're like, despite the potential backlash we might get for not sending out review units and not keeping customers informed, they just have that level of confidence that A, their product will sell because it's the freaking Nintendo Switch 2, and B, maybe, they think that their product is just that good and that ultimately, when people get their Nintendo Switch 2, they won't have that much to complain about. But the thing is, it's that element of like, we don't know for sure because there is nobody who has been able to test the Switch 2 and all of its features and capabilities, or at least, the essential ones before launch and tell people about it. So I don't know, it's a little weird, but I'd love to hear what you think about this style of console launch with this level of a lack of, review coverage. Do you think it's going to make much of a difference? Does it make much of a difference for you? Do you think it's shitty, or do you think it's not a big deal? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.